Did you know that Purgatory and Limbo aren't even in the Bible? Hey guys, it's John sitting here in my studio with a fabulous mug of John's Joe coffee. I hope you guys are doing well wherever you are on this Sunday morning. Purgatory, limbo, what's all that about? You know, the Catholic idea of purgatory and limbo was dangled as a cosmic waiting room for the not quite so good enough. But where do these places actually come from? You know, why do Catholics believe in them when Jeshua never mentioned them? He never talked about them once. He never used the word purgatory. He never used the word limbo. He never even brought up the concepts of a structure of the beyond. Never once. You know, both purgatory and limbo were human inventions rooted in philosophy and fear, not divine revelation. You know, in the Hebrew scriptures, which became the Old Testament, they reference Sheol, a shadowy realm of the dead, also the grave itself, because Sheol also meant a hole in the ground. It never mentions punishment. It never mentions levels of hell. That all doesn't come until the Middle Ages. The New Testament speaks of heaven and hell, but this heaven and hell idea comes from the ideologies of Paul, who believed the end of the world was happening in his lifetime. So he was speaking of a time of, you know, if you don't get this right now, in this life, your life now, you're going to have a struggle. Even he, in his apocalyptic visions, never spoke of purgatory or limbo. Jeshua focused on presence and love and not afterlife accounting systems. Those early Christians who expected the kingdom soon, they didn't build complicated afterlife doctrines. They just started living by the Abrahamic law, which, if you remember correctly in the Bible, Jeshua says in Matthew, he says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law." He said, "Before Abraham was, I am." So he wasn't teaching even about Sheol. He wasn't even teaching of the ancient doctrines of Abraham. In original Greek philosophy, Plato's had the purification of the soul. Aristotle had the ethics of moderation. But they never mentioned purgatory. They said that there is this sort of a structure of getting things right. It wasn't until Augustine in the 4th and 5th century speculating about a temporary cleansing fire, but he still never used the word purgatory. He said, you're going to be cleansed with fire. And that was the 5th century. So 400 to 500 years after Jeshua walked the earth. In the 6th century, Gregory the Great, but he gave himself that name, he popularized the idea that prayers and masses for the dead could shorten their suffering. And then by the Middle Ages, purgatory became doctrinal law, cemented by the Second Council of Lyon in 1274 and in Florence in 1493. 1274, 1493. Now we're getting up into the medieval early Renaissance time period, and in those time periods, this is when the same time frame that Dante wrote the Inferno, which talks about the levels of hell and all of that ideology. So what we're actually, purgatory and limbo are actually medieval constructs of theology that are trying to be married into religion. The real motivation was not theology, it was money. You know, they would sell indulgences and they'd sell masses for the dead, and that became the massive fundraiser for their entire church structure. Without that influx of money from these indulgences to get people out of purgatory, then the churches themselves never would have grown. Let's talk about the invention of limbo. Now, limbo is an interesting one because in a parent's life, the best representation of love is their child. You know, they love their child. They just love the whole idea of their child. Their child's born, dies young before they gets baptized. The church says, "Oh, there's a problem here. He wasn't baptized, so he's going into eternal damnation." And it was interesting because this was church doctrine for a very long time. What happens to those unbaptized babies? According to Augustine, they were going to be damned to hell, and parents, who were the people who were giving the church the money, felt that was unjust. Medieval theologians like Peter Abelard and Thomas Aquinas, they softened it to placate these parents who were so upset that their kid was going to burn in hell, and they created limbus infantium. which is a border place of natural happiness, but no vision of God. Then later on, they created Limbus Patrum, which also created a place for Old Testament figures waiting for Christ's resurrection to be in that space because they weren't here when Jeshua was alive. And so they're in Limbus Patrum, right? So they've created these two pieces of limbo, which we now refer to as a place that is nothingness, right? But the church declared that it was a place of natural happiness. This concept stuck around for centuries, despite never being official dogma. In fact, it had a conundrum within it, because their doctrine was literally saying that if you were not baptized, you were in a place of natural happiness. Now, I personally believe that's true because baptism is an indoctrination into a fear-based ideology. And when you go into a fear-based ideology, you will suffer from fear-based ideology because it's telling you to fear. And the Bible tells you not to fear. I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. The Buddha says, the secret to enlightenment is the eradication of fear. The Sufis say the struggle between you and God is your fear, and that's the veil, and you can overcome the fear. And so, but it became a real issue with the parents within the church because suddenly they're saying, wait a minute, if he's not baptized, my baby's naturally happy? They say, yeah, but he doesn't know God. Yeah, but he doesn't know God. That idea that he doesn't know God is the theologian's idea of saying, look, they're missing something. It's basically softening the idea that your baby is suffering in damnation and saying they're happy, but they just don't know God. See, but all of this kind of got messed up in 2007 when Pope Benedict admitted that limbo was never real, that it was just a medieval theory. He literally admitted that out loud. There was no limbo. And I would submit that there is no purgatory. And now a quick word from our sponsor. Coffee Time with John. This channel runs off coffee, so get your coffee and tea at johnsjoe.com. This concept of purgatory and limbo, we're not about true spiritual structure because there is no structure to spirituality. It is literally just love and be love. And the concept of these theologic goalposts that keep moving, it messes up human lives. Purgatory is used as a fear tactic. Pay indulgences, fund cathedrals, keep people obedient. It's all about keeping people into that space of, look, if you don't do this, this is going to happen. And limbo traumatized parents who lost children, leaving them uncertain about their own babies' souls. This was theology literally harming people at the core place of love because the child was such a representation of love. Both of these doctrines are examples of religion controlling people through invented afterlife ideologies and afterlife bureaucracies even. Jeshua's teachings were beautiful. He spoke of the kingdom of heaven within you, not external, no waiting rooms. He talked about being present in love and forgiveness. That was his message. He never spoke of cosmic punishment cycles. These invented doctrines distract from empowerment and divine connection in the now. In fact, they disempower and they disconnect because those ideas themselves are all about this theology that you must live into, which makes the church much more wealthy. But it doesn't talk about love. It doesn't talk about being present. It talks about, you've got to prepare for this horrible thing ahead of you. I am that I am is not I will be that I will be. I am that I am. Be in this divine connection that's always here within you. If you don't get indoctrinated into fear, you're going to be naturally happy because fear is the thing that makes you unhappy. Purgatory and limbo were man-made solutions to theological problems, not spiritual truths. They're literally moving the goalposts to keep you on the field. And once those goalposts move so much, it's like my field doesn't even look like a field anymore. It looks like a nebulous form that is always moving and changing. And because of that, I can't feel confident that this is my truth. And that's why the churches have lost 54% of their congregations over the past 20 years. We don't need invented afterlives and guilt and to be pushed into obedience. We can be love. We can be presence. We can have our own divine connection with the divine. Heaven isn't about waiting after death. Heaven is waiting right here in this breath, taking this moment and living into the presence and the love that Jeshua spoke about, that Buddha spoke about, that Krishna spoke about, that Muhammad spoke about, that Moses spoke about. It's about being in a good person, being love in the now. Has nothing to do with these theologies that make the churches wealthy. It's about being here, being now, and loving, like Jeshua taught. These concepts of purgatory and limbo, all of these are just theologic devices that are feeding the wealthy church. People will often struggle with the concept of spirituality and money the same. Well, that idea itself was a theologic addition. This concept that you shouldn't be wealthy, but you should give your money to the church. That was the church's idea. That wasn't anybody else's idea. This concept that a wealthy person can't get into heaven is because the last rites, they're supposed to give all their money to the church. So look at it from the perspective of, what is the church really selling? Whatever they can to get the money, and whatever they sell is always based in fear. And God is love, not fear. And that's my thought on this. You guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon. See ya. Bye.